All right? Let's talk a little bit first about the history of the Electoral College, what the framers' intent was, that sort of thing. The Electoral College is a very mysterious institution that was created by the framers of the Constitution. And I think there's probably a couple of things here that we can say about why they created this system for electing the president. First, I'm going to suggest to you that I think it was hard for the framers of the Constitution back in 1787 to imagine how logistically you could pull off a popular vote, a national popular vote for president. Right? Logistically, it just would not have been possible, I think they would have concluded. Remember, this is an era of communication by horseback. So the idea of coordinating a national election for president, a popular vote for president, was probably not feasible, just from a logistical standpoint. Okay? But more importantly, as a philosophical matter, the framers of the Constitution thought that this is the kind of decision that ordinary people are not in a good position to make. They didn't really trust the judgment of ordinary voters. Hey, why did the framers of the Constitution think that they needed to create a system where the president was elected by electors and not by ordinary voters? I just told you.
They didn't trust their judgment, I guess?
That's exactly right. They didn't trust the judgment of ordinary voters. They thought that this is... Were they elitists in this respect? I guess we can say that they were elitists. They didn't trust the judgment of ordinary voters to make this very important decision. They believed that the election of the president should be made, that the choice should be made by the elite, wise, elder statesmen in the various states. And so they viewed the Electoral College as a deliberative body, as a deliberative institution. Do you understand what I mean by that word, deliberative? What I mean is that they anticipated that the electors would sit around in their state capitals and discuss and debate, perhaps, this very important decision. And they would come to some decision, some consensus, and make a decision about who should be the next president. That's what I mean by the word deliberative. They saw the Electoral College as a deliberative body, that they were going to sit around and discuss and talk about who the best choice was for this job. Now, that may have been their intent, but I'm here to tell you that it never worked that way, not even one time. Not even once did it work that way. In the first two presidential elections, there was no reason for the electors to deliberate. As long as George Washington would accept the position, he was the virtually unanimous choice. Why would the electors sit around and deliberate such an obvious choice? Of course, George Washington is the man. He's going to be the president as long as he'll take the job. All right? He was almost a unanimous choice in both of his elections. It was almost unanimous vote of the electors. Okay? So they weren't deliberating. Okay? It was a slam dunk decision. It was an obvious decision. Okay? Once George Washington announced that he would not accept a third term as president, which, by the way, if you'll permit me to digress here for just a moment, okay, I would suggest to you that that was probably Washington's most significant contribution to our system of government. You see, Washington was not a great intellect like Jefferson. I'm not saying Washington was a moron. I mean, I'm certainly not saying that. But he was not Jefferson. He didn't have the brain power of Thomas Jefferson or James Madison or even Alexander Hamilton, for that matter. And Washington really didn't have his hand in the making of the Constitution. Right? That was Madison and Hamilton and those guys, right? But Washington was the respected elder statesman. Right? He was the hero of the Revolution. And he was the virtually unanimous choice once the Constitution was written and ratified. And there was this matter of electing the first president of the United States. Washington was the obvious choice. Okay? And then he served a second term. But as his second term was coming to a close, he announced that he would not accept a third term. And what I'm trying to tell you is that that is a significant contribution to our system of government, because it set a precedent for the peaceful transfer of power from one regime to another. Can you imagine what the kings of Europe must have thought of this man? What is he doing? He's voluntarily stepping down and letting go of power. What's wrong with him? And think about how this is accomplished today, in 2016, in many places around the world. You don't get a transfer of power in many places without significant bloodshed. But we have come to expect it in the American system. It's a routine. Can you imagine if President Obama barricaded himself in the White House and said, "I'm not leaving. I bet you can't get me out of here." Right? And by the way, he's the commander-in-chief of the Army, so presumably he could call the Army to, help him out. I don't know if the military officers would come along with that much, but obviously I'm being ridiculous, but that's what I'm trying to, we just accept it as routine. But I give that credit to Washington, because things could have played out very differently if Washington had taken a different approach. If he had been power hungry and grasping and, like, I'm just going to stay here forever if I can.